Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. I'm David Weston. Welcome now to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. On the brief today, Max Nissen in New York on the spread of the coronavirus in the United States. Peggy Collins in Washington, D.C. on what the viral outbreak really means for the economy. And Wendy Benjaminson also in Washington on the 14 states gearing up for primaries tomorrow on Super Tuesday. But Max, let's start with you. And I guess the big question a lot of us have is, do we know how many cases there are of coronavirus in the United States? We had Scott Gottlieb, the former FDA director, over the weekend saying there's thousands we don't know about.
Unfortunately, that appears to be the case. So the CDC very rapidly got a test together, but there turned out to be some issues with some of the reagents. Now they're starting to let labs, come up with their own test independently, but it's still going to be quite a long time before we can test as broadly as we'd like to. Ideally, you test anyone that comes in with symptoms and doesn't have the flu, because that's a pretty likely case of coronavirus. But it'll be some time to come before we could really have the surveillance and testing that we need.
We had the HHS Secretary, Alex Azar, over the weekend saying it's going to be a radical change this week on the ability to test. What are we talking about, radical change? How many people should we be testing on a given day or a given week?
Ideally, thousands a day, if not tens of thousands. Given the fact that we apparently had as many as 6 weeks of spread going on in Washington, new states popping up seemingly every hour with cases, it's really important to test as broadly as possible so you can actually catch and break those chains of transmission instead of sort of letting them go on and have people sitting around in the hospital waiting for a test. So, as much as we can ramp up, even if it takes letting hospitals or labs come up with their own tests, that's worth doing at this point.
Okay, Max, thank you so much for reporting. Max Nissen. And now let's go down to Washington. Peggy Collins to talk about some of the economic effects of that. Obviously, the big issue is the personal effect, but also there's the economy. We had some ISM numbers out this morning. They were a little soft, but not as bad as you might have thought.
That's right, David. But on a global level, we're seeing the manufacturing numbers come in looking like they're contracting the most since 2009. So that's one of the biggest things that economists are looking out for. We came into 2020 with a global economy that was fragile in part because of the strains from the trade war. And we were just seeing signs of stabilizing and recovering. And now the coronavirus is putting additional pressure on global economy. So if we see contraction in places like Europe, that could have a ripple effect on the U.S., even without an outbreak in many places in the U.S. of the virus itself.
So, Peggy, putting you on the spot, is help on its way? We heard from Jay Powell, the chair of the Fed, on Friday, saying they were really watching this because it's evolving. They might do something. People think that's cut rates. Then you had the Bank of Japan and the Bank of England both follow pretty quickly thereafter, saying we're prepared to really step in.
That's right. Well, certainly markets are expecting the Fed to take action, possibly cut even before their next meeting, which is scheduled for March 17th, 18th. So we're on the lookout for that. As you said, David, right now, most of the central banks around the world have been messaging to the markets and to economies that they are ready to step in, that they are willing to use their tools. But so far, we haven't seen them come out with a coordinated rate cut, but certainly on the lookout for that.
And I must say, it sort of begs the question, is that the right tool for this particular problem? I mean, lower interest rates are not going to stop a coronavirus. And as a practical matter, interest rates are pretty darn low right now if you look at the yields on the 10-year.
Well, that's exactly right. So one of the things we're looking at is really, would it be a coordinated effort between monetary and fiscal policy? In terms of the virus, it's really putting a strain potentially on businesses in terms of their ability to hire or their ability to get supplies from elsewhere in the world, which could put pressure on their ability to pay loans or their need to take a loan. So some of those actions might come from small business loans or an ability to keep credit flowing. So that's separate from a rate cut. But in terms of the market, it's a rate cut that may do the best to stabilize market turmoil and fears there.
Okay, Peggy, thank you so much for reporting. That's Peggy Collins reporting from Washington. And now we're going to stay in Washington with Wendy Benjaminson because it's a big week in politics as well as in the markets. Wendy, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Is the political climate really different given the coronavirus? Is President Trump maybe a little more vulnerable than he might have been a month or two ago?
Well, David, he might be. I mean, one of his big re-election strengths is the economy, the unemployment rate, the interest rates, everything that Peggy was just so ably describing. And I think that if the economy is really going down, then and becoming weaker, then he doesn't have that argument. Whether, he'll say it's not his fault, it's the virus, all these things, but he will, but that certainly could hurt him. It certainly could hurt him with Republicans who focus on the stock market, and it can certainly hurt him with people who may be losing their jobs or things like that if this gets really bad. Which
leads us naturally to the question of, if it's not President Trump, who's the rival who will go up against him in November? We do have Super Tuesday coming up tomorrow. It's just a day away now, Super Tuesday. Joe Biden, the former vice president, says the whole world is different after that big victory on Saturday. Is he right?
I think he certainly feels like the whole world is different. He came off two really bad losses in Iowa and New Hampshire, and then he came in second in Nevada. That was a really good night for him Saturday. I mean, he won half the vote. That was the biggest decisive win. He trounced Bernie Sanders, who is the national frontrunner right now, by 30 points. The big wild card in the race is for tomorrow is Michael Bloomberg, who is another centrist candidate with whom voters who believe in that sort of moderate centrist, let's get back to normal sort of, campaign message, they might split their votes between the two of them, between Joe Biden and Michael Bloomberg, which would leave Bernie Sanders collecting all the votes from people who are more interested in a more radical change in government, in his leftist policies, and things like that. And remember, the biggest state tomorrow night is California, and Bernie Sanders is very dominant there.
And Michael Bloomberg, of course, is the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, our parent company. Talk about California, because all the polls I've seen show that Bernie Sanders is going to have a very big night out there.
Bernie Sanders is very likely to have a big night out there. That is a very liberal state. It is a state where his income inequality argument is not philosophical. It's real. I mean, there are those pockets, Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area and down in the wealthy parts of Los Angeles, where people are obviously very, very wealthy. But the cost of living there is so high and so out of reach for all of the people who police those people, who keep them safe, who keep their houses clean, who, provide those people all those services to farm workers. I mean, those people are really, really struggling in the California economy. They have a terrible homeless problem. And so you have Bernie Sanders come in and say free health care, free housing, free tuition, free childcare, and that is really resonating out there.
Wendy, thank you so very much. That's Bloomberg's Wendy Benjamin. She didn't mention it, but there's a terrific piece that her team has out on that very subject of income inequality in California and its relationship to Bernie Sanders' strength out there. And our special coverage of the Super Tuesday primaries starts tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Now it's time to find out how the markets are doing in reaction to today's top stories. Joining us now is Abigail Doolittle. Well, a little relief, it looks like.
Definitely.
Maybe.
I would say for sure, actually, at this point, a rebound rally. Earlier today, it was kind of dodgy, flipping between small gains and losses for the S&P 500 and the other major averages. But at this point, take a look at these gains. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ both up nearly about 3%, the best day in more than a year. This, of course, comes after the worst week since 2008. All of this on uncertainty around this coronavirus and what it will mean for the global economy. Now, what's really interesting about this, it fits into past periods of volatility. When you look back at 2018, that fourth quarter, there would be a big down week followed by a big up week, so on and so forth, until it resolved between the bulls and the bears. The same thing in 2011, August and September, that volatility finally resolved in October. The same thing in 2008. So all the selling pressure that we had seen last week, now we see some investors willing to buy, perhaps relieved by the fact that we had those horrible PMIs out of China. That was sort of a given. So the fact that they came out, and also now some of these cases in the United States, while it's awful and it can be a little bit intimidating to some of us, it's the reality. And so instead of the reality not being spoken about, we now have some proof. But take a look at the Dow Transports. This has been the index leading the whole way with the coronavirus. I'm not quite sure whether or not it's up on the day. It had been right around even, but over the last several days, down sharply. So this is a big index to keep an eye on with those airlines. So
some investors are buying stocks. They're also buying bonds.
They're also buying bonds.
The yield is even down further in the 10-year.
Yes, so that tells you that we're probably more likely to see the volatility that we have seen in past periods, because investors don't know whether they're all clear to buy stocks, so they're also hedging it with bonds. Encouraging, perhaps, we're seeing a bit of a bounce for the commodity complex. That's a bit risk on. Interesting, though, some of the top gainers for the S&P 500 names like Costco, its best day since 2009 as Americans are stockpiling.
Exactly.
Clorox as they're buying bleach. So this is far from over. Probably more volatility ahead, David.
Okay, and you'll be here to cover it.
Yes.
Thank goodness. Okay, that's Abigail Doolittle with a report on the markets. We turn now to Mark Crumpton. He's here with Bloomberg First Word News.
David, group of 7 finance ministers will lead a global teleconference tomorrow to decide how to handle the threat posed to the global economy by the coronavirus outbreak. Bloomberg has learned the finance chiefs will be joined by their central bank governors. Earlier today, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said the ministers need to ensure that their responses are, quote, as coordinated as possible in order to be effective. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson warns that the coronavirus outbreak will become more significant for the UK in the next days. Tomorrow, the Prime Minister's government will publish a plan to fight the disease. Meantime, New York is expecting more cases after identifying its first one, and Iran and South Korea both reported another jump in infections. The U.S. Supreme Court says it will again consider whether to strike down Obamacare. The justices will hear a Democratic appeal seeking to reaffirm the Affordable Care Act's constitutionality. The Trump administration is backing efforts by Republican-led states to invalidate the law. The court will hear arguments in the 9-month term that starts in October, with a ruling likely in the first half of 2021. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz headed to their third matchup in less than a year. The result may not be any different. The polls forecast a deadlock. Still, Netanyahu's chances may have picked up in recent days. Gantz is Israel's former military chief. Neither candidate was able to form a coalition government after the last 2 elections. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on quick take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks very much, Mark. Coming up, more on the coronavirus and possible treatments. We're going to talk with an expert on infectious diseases from Brown University. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
We will see more cases, that we will see continued community spreading in the United States as we're seeing around the world. How big that gets, we do not know, but we have the most advanced public health system and surveillance system in the world. We are actively working on a vaccine.
That was Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar on ABC yesterday. Here to take us through the science is Dr. Eleftherios Melanakis. He is professor of medicine and infectious diseases at Brown University. He comes to us today on the telephone. So, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Give us a sense of the science. What do we know, what don't we know about the extent to which the coronavirus is already present in the United States?
Good morning. This is remarkable how much we have been able to learn in such a short period of time. In 2 months, we know something about the almost 90,000 cases that have been reported. We know the pathogenesis of the virus. We know a lot about how the virus is transmitted. We know a lot about the clinical picture. Now, your question had to do with the U.S. situation. So we know that there are micro-epidemics, small or larger clusters, and we do know from the sequencing data that in some areas the virus has circulated for about 3 to 4 weeks. We start to see also imported cases from parts of Europe that had a secondary effect. Italy, also from parts of China and South Korea and other areas where they had a big number of cases.
So Dr. Melanakis, compare this, if you will, with the Spanish flu epidemic about 100 years ago, because we had Bill Gates, who's not an infectious disease expert, but he has some passing familiarity with public health, writing in the New England Journal of Medicine over the weekend, saying that this does remind him in some ways of that, both because of the infectious nature of it. He says it's very efficient in the way it transmits itself, and also in the lethality, that there are some apparently healthy people who can die from it.
Yes, well, there are parallels. That's what our brains always do. When we have something that is so different, we try to go back either in history or in our mind and associate with something that we know. And that is the way that knowledge develops in our brains. So what we try to do is try to go back and see different paradigms. There are indeed some similarities. Some of them are worrisome. The mortality rate of influenza was high, but at that time we had no health system and no real no antibiotics, for example, to fight secondary infections. The information would travel very slowly. Now we know a lot in a very short period of time. On the other hand, also there is a difference in transmission. If this was influenza, it would have been a pandemic already, and there was the containment efforts would have done absolutely nothing. Now we do see some containment efforts to at least delay this from becoming a pandemic with a narrow sense of the definition. Also, something, however, that we need to carry from that experience from the pandemic of the influenza in the 1910s is that the majority of deaths happened after in the next season. So it started at the end of the one season, and then there was a bounce back at the next fall and winter. So what I predict is that as diagnostic testing becomes more widely available, at least in the U.S., we're going to see a number of cases go up. This does not mean necessarily that there is such a dramatic change. We're just now trying to catch up on what has been going on for a few weeks' time. And then, hopefully, there is an expectation from other coronaviruses that the transmission will decrease. But also we need to prepare for the long haul. Long haul meaning a few months to go through this and be prepared for any re-emergence of the situation in the next season. In that regard, yes, we have a lot to learn from the pandemic flu.
So, Dr. Milonakis, you referred to the diagnostic testing. There is some concern here that we are behind in the United States. We heard Mr. Azar actually addressing that it's going to get ramped up quickly. How far behind are we in the number of test kits out there available, deployed to use? Where should we be at this point?
In this case, there are so many unknowns, and there is a situation that we all try to figure it out as we move forward. So there is no should, but there is a situation that we have to see it in a pragmatic way. The testing now is becoming more and more common. I would like to have seen that earlier, but that is something that it is what it is. And now the testing is available, and hopefully there will be even more availability very shortly from commercial as well as from state labs.
Dr. Milonakis, on the treatment side, we heard from Scott Gottlieb, the former head of FDA, over the weekend saying that he would expect we'd have a treatment by something like September or October, but that actually a vaccine would be much, much later than that. Does that sound reasonable to you, given your understanding of this area?
Yes. Well, let's look at the timetable for those two elements. Antivirals. Of course, we cannot develop an antiviral in such short period of time. What we're trying to do is repurposing antivirals for other RNA viruses, or especially antivirals that were developed for SARS and other coronaviruses, and try to see if they're effective. In vitro, we have some interesting, good results. However, the clinical trials are ongoing, and we should start seeing good results in a couple of weeks. That is the time frame for antiviral therapy that we have in mind. However, we don't know how effective they are going to be, who is going to benefit from those antivirals, and then you are running into the problem of availability. How can you have antivirals available for a large number of people around the globe? So scaling up is going to be another challenge, assuming that we're going to have an antiviral. And also, as I said before, who is going to benefit and when to give it. And also, with antimicrobials, you run the risk of resistance. So you don't want to have one antiviral, you want to have choices. So that is the time frame of antivirals. Clinical trials are ongoing, many of them. No reason to go into individual ones. That is the overall thing, situation, and results in 2 weeks. Time starting to have results from those. Now, the vaccine is another challenge. The vaccine, heavy candidate vaccines, it's quite, it is something that we have already. We have candidate vaccines. We know which part we need to target. We know of the virus is the part that associates with the lung cells of our body, and that is where the antibiotics aim for. So the question is not having a candidate vaccine, not going through the initial steps. The long period that it takes is the evaluation of the vaccine, evaluation of effectiveness, evaluation of immunity. Right. So that is going to be, that's why we always quote a year to have a candidate vaccine.
Okay, thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. Professor Eleftherios Milanakis of Brown University. We have breaking news right now. The European Central Bank Supervisory Board Chair, Andrea Enria, is meeting some early resistance to his proposals for boosting mergers and acquisitions in the continent's banking industry. That's according to people with knowledge familiar with the matter. They are resisting his attempt. We know Mr. Enria said, let's liberalize the way we consolidate banks in Europe. Apparently, the ECB Supervisory Council is saying, not so fast, Mr. Enria. Okay, that's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Equities are rebounding today following the worst week for the S&P 500 since 2008. Taylor Riggs is back from the West Coast, the tech world, and she's going to explain it all to us.
Yeah, so finally a little bit of some good news. And this is interesting. We got China PMIs overnight that were not good, plunging to about 37.5 reading from a 50 in February. But then the CSI 300 over in China had one of its best days since last May. So that gave a little bit of some optimism overseas. Clearly, that's translating here into the U.S. markets. We're up anywhere from, 2.5%. David, one thing I really have my eye on, though, is those yields. Because if you take a look at the 2 and the 10-year, they're still falling. Earlier this morning, they were still down by as much as 12 basis points. I keep hearing that until we start to get yields bottoming out and yields either bottoming out or rising, the equity rally doesn't have a lot of strength. So you are seeing markets higher today, but with yields still falling, it really is hard to call a bottom here. And as they always say, catch the falling knife, right?
Yeah, they sure aren't bottoming out yet. At the same time, companies that favor hoarding are doing pretty well.
100%.
Costco, it's good. Yeah. Walmart.
Yeah, you're getting Walmart, Costco, even Clorox. Shares are all higher today. And interestingly enough as well, Amazon is higher. You think that you're home alone ordering, online shopping, even though a lot of the other big tech is lower, Amazon managing to be higher in the last month. And then today, of course, on the day, take a look at that. Walmart, Costco, all those big bulk shops still higher. And Clorox, as you mentioned, everyone trying to get those disinfectants.
I was going to say everybody's home ordering hand wipes and masks and things. Exactly. Okay. Right. Thanks so much. Welcome back, Taylor. Great to have you here. Coming up, our special coverage of Super Tuesday kicks off tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to have a preview next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on Bloomberg Radio. From New York, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We're a day away from Super Tuesday, when 14 states and 1 territory will hold Democratic primaries. The shape of the playing field has changed, with former Vice President Biden winning big in South Carolina, bringing in endorsements and money, and former Mayor Pete Buttigieg abruptly dropping out of the race. Here's a closer look at what to expect.
The self-proclaimed Democratic socialist took the conventional wisdom and turned it upside down. All that talk about Sanders' support being limited to young white liberals who are disaffected, no one's saying that now. Sanders won 47% of the vote in the Nevada caucuses, and he did it with a broad-based coalition that looked more like the Democratic Party as a whole. Now, Sanders is eyeing bigger prizes.
Don't tell anybody. I don't want to get them nervous. We're going to win the Democratic primary in Texas.
Texas is just one of the 14 states at stake on Super Tuesday. It is the biggest day on the presidential primary calendar. There are 1,357 delegates up for grabs, 1/3 of the total number available. California and Texas are the two biggest prizes. Others include North Carolina, Virginia, and Massachusetts. The big question is, can anti-Sanders moderates band together to stop the frontrunner?
We're alive and we're coming back and we're going to win.
Biden was the longtime national frontrunner. He hadn't won a state until Saturday's victory in South Carolina. His supporters hope that could give him a boost on Super Tuesday. And there's the Michael Bloomberg factor. The billionaire will be on the ballot for the first time. His performance in his first debate was widely criticized, but he has spent a fortune on advertising that will likely shore up his support.
That means beating the biggest bully of all.
Of course, Bloomberg is the majority owner of the parent of Bloomberg News. Meanwhile, the candidate who took Bloomberg down in that debate is looking for a bounce.
Every time somebody tells you a woman can't beat Donald Trump, well, I don't know about a woman, but I'll tell you Elizabeth Warren can beat Donald Trump.
But Warren and the others won't get a chance unless they figure out a way to stop Bernie Sanders. Super Tuesday could be one of their last opportunities.
For more analysis, welcome now our panel of Chris Jacobs. He's founder and CEO of the Juniper Research Group and also author of The Case Against Single Payer. And Al Moder, he is Democratic strategist and shareholder in Brownstein, Hine, Farber, Schreck. They both come to us today from Washington. So let me start with you, Al. Has the world changed after that big win? It was a big win. You can't deny it for Joe Biden down in South Carolina on Saturday.
It's changed, David, but it hasn't changed as much as the vice president would like. He still has a big task in front of him, and he needs to perform tomorrow to stop the Sanders momentum, which is certainly going to come out of California, perhaps Texas, and other states. The key here is that 15% threshold. How many candidates can get above it in each of the states that they're competing in and in the congressional districts, because states award delegates both statewide and congressional district by congressional district. And how many delegates can be awarded to Sanders versus the field? And all of them, other than him, are looking to keep him below a majority of delegates.
And Chris, as you look at it across the aisle over on the Democratic side, is this breaking down to some extent along geographic lines? That is to say, north versus south, with Bernie Sanders really being quite dominant in the north, but maybe Vice President Biden having some chance in North Carolina and Virginia, Tennessee, places like that?
It's breaking down along geographic lines. It's also breaking down along demographic lines. One of the things that really propelled Sanders to victory in Nevada was his strength among Hispanic voters, along with the traditional kind of working class whites and young people. And so that is what propelled Sanders in Nevada. That is potentially what has him leading the polls in California. Could also mean he breaks through in Texas, whereas Joe Biden's support on Saturday in South Carolina was based on African-American voters, who are a majority of the voters in the Democratic primary. Joe Biden, in theory, could do well in southern states with a majority of African-American voters on tomorrow.
I wonder also, Al, the extent to which the coronavirus may affect this race as we go forward, because this is a whole different kettle of fish, so to speak, we didn't have a month or two ago. And it really raises questions about economic security, health security, things like that.
Well, I think the vice president is on firm ground here. He can talk about his experience with President Obama. They had established a pandemic office within the White House, which President Trump has mysteriously gotten rid of, and irresponsibly, I would say, gotten rid of. And Bernie Sanders might make a case and say, look, this is why we need everybody covered under our health care system. We can't have gaping loopholes where people don't have coverage, particularly when there were life-threatening diseases threatening the globe. So I think it will play to the benefit of some candidates more than others. I noticed that Bloomberg also ran a pretty strong ad against President Trump, suggesting that he had the strength and the experience after 9/11 to deal with crises like this. So it's certainly being injected into the live stream of the campaign.
Well, Chris, let's go over to you, because you've written the book on single payer. You're no big fan of it whatsoever. At the same time, are there two things that come together here, which is pocketbook issues, how the economy's doing on the one hand, and health on the other? Two things that voters say they care about a lot that could come together in a way that really could jeopardize the president's position.
Well, certainly the coronavirus is a wild card, not only what it has on, an impact on people's lives and safety and people contracting the disease, but then also the broader economic impact. We'll see how it plays out in the coming weeks and months ahead. I think the Democrats have an interesting conundrum on their side. A majority of voters in each of the 4 Democratic primaries, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, all supported single-payer Medicare for all system. A majority of Democratic voters in each of the 4 states, even in South Carolina where Joe Biden won on Saturday. The problem for the Democrats is a majority of voters of the country don't necessarily support it. So you've got an issue where the Democratic base is going against the broader population.
Well, David.
Sorry, Al, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, one thing I would add here is that this is going to have a major impact on the general election as well, and nobody can really control it. And this is why I think the president is worried. This could be his black swan event, so to speak. If we have a global pandemic that shuts down economic growth opportunities, you see major companies in America imposing travel bans right now. We've already had government-imposed travel bans in many countries. Conferences are being shut down. The economy is going to slow, as Goldman Sachs has predicted. And there's nothing anybody can do about that. That could become a problem for President Trump, whose hallmark for his reelection is his economic success, at least as he argues it.
And Chris, I want to come back to you. There is a distinction between single payer on the one hand and universal coverage on the other. You can have universal coverage without having single payer. Is that too subtle for American voters to really sort out?
Well, I don't think so. Joe Biden certainly wants to build on Obamacare, and that's been the mantra of his campaign, that he's attacked Bernie Sanders for single payer being too radical. Joe Biden has his own problems, though. He received over $13 million in income from his business that he didn't pay Obamacare taxes on, which makes him a flawed messenger to really say he supports Obamacare when he had an opportunity to pay Obamacare taxes on his income, and he went to great lengths to avoid that.
So, Al, is this a strength or a weakness for the Democratic Party?
Well, every election in the past 20 years has turned on this issue, and I think it's up in the air as to who wins on this issue in the fall. But I will tell you this. If we're running under the Bernie Sanders ticket in terms of taking away health care from 160-some million Americans, it will be a loser for Democrats.
Okay, thank you to both of you. That's really very helpful discussion. That's Al Motor and Chris Jacobs. They both are coming to us today from Washington. And we want you to tune in to our full coverage of Super Tuesday tomorrow. We're going to start at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And now, for Bloomberg First Word News, we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, some American troops in Afghanistan will be coming home soon. Defense Secretary Mark Esper says he's given the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan the go-ahead to begin the initial withdrawal of American military. The drawdown was required to start within 10 days of Saturday's signing of a peace deal with the Taliban. Nearly 13,000 American troops are currently serving in Afghanistan. The coronavirus is spreading in the United States. New Hampshire has just reported its first case of the virus. That's after a Manhattan woman became the first confirmed case in New York State. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Portugal has just confirmed its second case, according to the health directorate there. The Supreme Court has rejected an appeal of the federal ban on bump stocks, devices that allow semi-automatic firearms to fire rapidly like machine guns. President Trump said the government would move to ban bump stocks following a 2017 shooting in Las Vegas in which a gunman used the devices to shoot concert-goers from his hotel room. 58 people were killed and hundreds were injured. Jack Welsh has died. Welsh was a champion of corporate efficiency who built General Electric into one of the world's largest companies, and he influenced generations of business leaders. GE stock rose almost 3,000% over Welsh's 2 decades as CEO. Still, his reliance on GE's finance unit would prove to be a threat to the company after he retired. Jack Welsh was 84 years old. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Panera Bread is best known for its 2,000 stores across the United States and Canada and for being a pioneer in fast casual food, moving on from there to a commitment to healthy ingredients and early adoption of technologies like mobile ordering and delivery and pickup. Now it wants to be known as well for its coffee. And we welcome the Panera CEO, he's Naren Chowdhury, to tell us about the latest initiative. This is part of our Conversation in Chiefs. So, Naren, welcome. Tell us about this initiative. You're going to subscription coffee, as I understand it.
Yeah, I think we're so excited because I think we're really disrupting the industry. So here's the insight. Every day in the US, there are 150 to 200 million coffees being consumed every single day. But at least half of those consumers are conflicted about the price that they have to pay. Why is the price so high for quality coffee? And that's where Panera comes in, because we have great coffee, and we believe we can eliminate that source of conflict and give high quality coffee at very accessible price. In fact, I believe, if coffee is about optimism, it's more than just hot liquid, right? So unlimited coffee is unlimited optimism. And we're excited about this because we believe at the back of this, America's cup can always be full.
There you go. And now you've tested this some.
Yeah.
What were the results of the test that really drove you to do this so quickly?
Yeah, so we tested it in about 150 cafes for more than about 3 months, and here are some remarkable sort of results. Firstly, the frequency went up by more than 200%, which is fantastic. The food attachment.
People just came to the stores more often.
More often, and also new customers who never came before. At least 25% of the frequency was actually through customers who hadn't come in before. 70% increase in food attachment. So people are coming in, discovering the joy of our food, and then basically adding that. And third is, as you know, subscription works only as a recurring revenue model if there's renewal. So we found 90 to 95% renewing that after the month after month.
That was going to be my question, is churn, because churn will sometimes kill you on those subscriptions.
The churn is less than 5%, which means the customers really see value in this, and we're super excited. And here's the final thing. Almost 75% of the redemption of coffee during the breakfast day part is happening on off-premise channels. So things like drive-through, delivery, to-go, and so on, underscoring the importance and desire for customers to have a frictionless, convenient experience around coffee.
And so when I go in, if I've got a subscription, I don't have to go through the normal checkout?
You can do it unlimited ways, where you want it, when you want it, how you want it. Off-premise, on-premise, you go inside, you go to the kiosk, you load your My Panera Reward membership number, and go to your coffee station, pick it up, don't have to interact with anybody if you don't want to, and out you go.
So it sounds like an exciting new initiative. You've done the research. You've got every reason to have optimism about it. It is an unfortunate time to be rolling it out right now with the coronavirus scare going across the country. How do those two things fit together for you as you run Panera?
Yeah, coronavirus, fast emerging situation. We're watching it very, very closely. We're monitoring all of the CDC notifications. We're thinking through our supply chain plans to ensure ongoing sort of continuity of supply chain. And most importantly, we are prepared to ensure ongoing safety for our customers and our employees. So we're prepared and we're watching it closely, but so far we're just, excited about this initiative, and we're going absolutely flat out.
Have you seen any effects of the coronavirus on your business so far?
Not yet.
None at all?
None.
And how do you provide for particularly employees? Because one of the things I've learned is we're talking about all this testing to be done by CDC, but actually it costs money. You have to pay money. I mean, thousands of dollars to testing. A lot of hourly employees, people who are living on the margin, don't have money for that.
That's right.
So how do you make sure, if you have a situation, I hope you don't, how do you make sure that you can provide testing for your employees?
Yeah, we will always do it the right way. I think this is something which is, if it does happen, and it will be unfortunate, but we will handle it with the utmost compassion, as we're known to do as a brand, and do things the right way for our employees and our customers.
Do you have a way of monitoring whether you have people with symptoms so that you know pretty quickly that we got a problem in that area?
So right now, actually, we are just reinforcing the processes as you would expect in terms of just personal hygiene, washing the hands more often, sanitizing all food services frequently, and if any employee is unwell, asking them to actually stay at home and so on. And just thinking through that entire process as the situation emerges to ensure that we're really well prepared to anticipate and react to it.
So Panera has a somewhat different ownership structure.
Yes.
You're not just publicly traded, you're held privately.
Privately by JB.
By JB, and it's a family basically over in Switzerland.
It's an investment fund, yeah.
Does that give you a little bit more leeway or flexibility or cushion if in fact there is a downturn, if in fact we do have a real economic slowdown in this country?
Yeah, JB is always committed. I think what's unique about JB is they're always committed to building shareholder value by building great brands for the mid and long term. So they don't have a short-term view on brands. And I think so that is very much the approach and intent of JAB. And I would say that we are fully empowered to continue to do what's right for the business and the people for the mid and long term. So I think we will continue to do that.
So talk about growth for Panera.
Yeah.
It sounds like this initiative in part is to get more out of your existing stores, essentially.
That's right.
Yeah. You get more frequency, people are buying this food and things like that. Is that the principal growth pattern for you, or are you thinking about expanding in other ways?
So I think on the first question, I think this I feel is it's going to be a very interesting tactic for us to actually explode our breakfast day part. Because if you think about it, breakfast also has this unique dilemma for customers, a choice between good coffee and good food, you know? Either you get good coffee or good food. And at Panera, you don't have to choose because our food is not rethermalized. Our food is freshly prepared. And I think it's food that is 100% clean. We're the only retail that does that. So I feel very confident that our breakfast day part will grow. We're also focused on growing our dinner day part in the next few months ahead. So just driving the core business through innovation and value is one component of our strategy. Then continue to grow our new cafes, you know, in the country.
As I said, you have about 2,000, is that right, in the United States?
2,200.
2,200 in the United States and Canada. Yeah. How fast are you adding new stores?
So we're adding about 100 odd new cafes every year. And then we're also developing new concepts, smaller format concepts, urban concepts. As you know, Panera is primarily a suburban brand.
Yes.
So we're looking at more flexible ways to actually penetrate the urban market. So that's another area of growth. CPG is a very interesting avenue for growth. We are growing at about 30% in our CPG business. We think that's going to be a big driver for the future. So I think driving the core, omni-channel growth with off-premise channels like delivery and catering. We're the nation's largest catering provider, the nation's largest delivery provider in fast casual, with our own fleet of 10,000 drivers. So that's another area of growth. New cafes, new formats, and new channels.
How do you define your competitive set? How do you benchmark against whom you're competing right now?
Yeah, so I think our competitive set varies because, you know, we are actually players in 3 day parts. I think it's the coffee players around the breakfast and the morning day part. It's some of the higher end QSR brands for the lunch day part. And the evening day part is more around fast casual brands.
And how do you assess your market share in those competitive sets?
So we have a ton of research that we do, that, you know, the black box markers, et cetera, and we're constantly looking at who are we losing share to or gaining share from. And it is fascinating to have a business where you have 3 different competitive sets for 3 different day parts. But we think that, you know, that the core of what makes us different is that we eliminate the need for our customers to make a compromise. No need to compromise between craveability and wellness. No need to compromise between quality and convenience. At Panera, you can do everything. Get it all.
Fascinating. Congratulations on your new initiative here.
Thank you.
Is it your coffee cup is always full? How do you say it?
Your cup is always full.
There you go. Panera Bread. There you go. Many thanks to Naren Chowdhury of Panera Bread. He's the CEO there. Coming up, demanding undivided attention. Why an activist investor thinks Twitter needs much more focused CEO in this big election year. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. Shares of Twitter surged in early trading, with Bloomberg reporting that Elliott Management is pushing for changes after taking a $1 billion stake in the company, including possibly replacing co-founder and CEO Jack Dorsey. Here with more is Bloomberg's senior deals reporter Ed Hammond. So this issue's been kicking around for a while, saying you can have one CEO, you can't be a CEO of 2 companies, Square and Twitter. Why is it coming to the forefront now?
And a CEO of 2 companies who wants to work remotely from Africa, at least some of the time.
Oh, there is that too,
yeah. Look, I think you're right. It's been an issue for a while. I think it's obviously big news now because Elliott, as a sort of, you know, top brand activist, have shown up in the stock and are going to push for some changes. We don't know exactly what yet, but it does seem like it's going to center around Jack Dorsey, what role he can play at the company, and whether indeed it is appropriate for him to continue in this sort of odd situation of, as you say, having 2 CEO hats at once.
So Ed, do we have a sense whether it's Jack Dorsey and having 2 hats, or whether it's Jack Dorsey and he wants to stick to his knitting and not really expand out the brand the way some other social media companies have done?
If it's the latter, and we don't yet know whether it is, that's a very interesting bet by Elliott. Look, Jack Dorsey is rightly, I think, credited with being, a visionary, and at this company, he's very well loved. The employee base, apparently, they're extremely loyal to him. So I think there would be serious questions to be raised if anyone came in and said, look, you're not doing the right things. You should grow the company this way or that way, or go and acquire other things. So it's fairly limited, the options that Elliott have here. Can you sell the company? Potentially, yes, but there aren't obvious buyers out there. Can you go and acquire another product line? Maybe, but Twitter's whole thing has been that they've stuck to doing a single business, and they've done very well at it.
Done very well, but they haven't done as well as one might have thought. I mean, you compare their stock, for example, to Facebook's, and it has not gone up nearly as much as Facebook's gone up. And you'd think with the President of the United States using it every single day, multiple times, there would have been some upside. And now we're in election year, you'd think there'd be some upside there.
Yeah, but I think this is one of the issues, is that Twitter tends to get lumped in with big tech, things like Facebook, things like Google and Amazon. And it's not. It's a single-use platform. It just does one thing. It doesn't build out in the way that Facebook has, in the way that Google has. So I think it's a bit unfair that we look at it side by side with them and say, well, it hasn't grown the same way, despite its, as you say, it has a huge user base.
But did Jack Dorsey maybe give up one opportunity in saying, I'm not going to take political advertising as we go into this really big political year?
He potentially gave up a significant economic opportunity, but he kept the business the way he wanted to keep it in terms of, I suppose, the purity of content. And that, again, is something, it's very hard to put a dollar value on that, but that's something that probably, again, the employees like, the users obviously like. And look, ultimately, it's a company he founded, it was his vision, and he's running it the way he sees fit, and part of that is keeping it out of the fray around politics.
But Elliott management might have a slightly different idea.
They may indeed.
Okay, thank you so much to Bloomberg's senior deals reporter. He is Ed Hammond. Coming up, remember, our special coverage of Super Tuesday kicks off tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And coming up in our second hour Balance of Power right here on Bloomberg Radio, we're going to speak with Lester Munson. He's principal at government relations firm BGR Group and adjunct faculty member at Johns Hopkins. We're going to talk about that Super Tuesday coming up tomorrow. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.